Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Joe LaRosa, and we're back here at the Joe LaRosa Show. And normally I kind of joke with our guests that they're going to be sitting on the hot seat, but Dr. Brad O'Connor here, Chief Economist from Florida Realtors, man, I am putting you on the hot seat today because we got to get down to, like, what is going on, like, in this market, right? So, you know, before we get started, a little funny kind of side story. So we had, obviously, Dr. O'Connor come over to the Legacy Summit, a big annual conference that we do every year. And he kind of, you know, has been seeing now the kind of the rowdy crowd that we get every time that we do it. It's kind of almost like a pep rally. But, you know, you got to go there and kind of, you know, keep the excitement going. And so, you know, we had him there in 2020. It was March of 2020 or end of February. And then, of course, we had then COVID hit right after, and everything kind of went like to, you know, chaotic times there for a bit. And then last year, he comes into the room, into this little green room, and he's like, man, gosh, economy, you know, this and that, whatever else. And I'm like, we got to be positive. We got to be positive. And he went out there, obviously, you know, and did his thing. And our group loves you, and we appreciate you coming out every year and just kind of, you know, giving some words of wisdom on kind of what's going on. But on today's episode, we're going to be real. And we're going to kind of just get down to kind of what is really going on and kind of what are some of the... There's a lot of, I would say, forecasters out there, people that want to become experts. And all of a sudden now they want to go on Facebook and go on different social media outlets and talk about, hey, this is what's happening. But what really is happening, right? So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into it first. I first want the audience here to get to know Dr. O'Connor here. So if you can, just tell the audience that we have watching a little bit about yourself and kind of how did you get into the role of becoming a chief economist for Florida Realtors?
Yeah, well, it's a pretty long story that I can make very boring and long, but I'll just long and short of it. I grew up in the Midwest. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati, and growing up there, my dad was an engineer, aerospace engineer at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and you know, helped me with my math growing up, and just something I excelled at. I went to Ohio State for college, tried a few different majors. It wasn't working out for a while there.
We joked a little bit about it beforehand, so we won't go into all those stories. I
had a good time, but we switched over to architecture. I gave that a shot because that's something I always thought I was doing. It was completely out of, you know, I had been biochemistry or information systems. I was interested in lots of things. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to dabble in a lot of those things. But I'm in architecture class, and I'm like trying to build something, and my teaching assistant comes up to me and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm measuring the tangent of this angle because I want to bring some kind of Platonic geometry into bring it to bear. I'm making this stuff up." And
you could have fooled me. Like, I wouldn't know those
Brad,
terms.
You should probably just work with numbers. So I said, okay, yeah, maybe this isn't for me. And I had taken an econ class. I liked it. I got into it, and the rest is history. I loved it. I got a job as an undergrad at the Department of Economics at Ohio State. Everyone encouraged me to go on, and that's what I did. I got a PhD at Florida State. And my wife and I moved after we got our PhDs to Orlando, where she was at Disney, and she brought me over there, and I worked at Disney for a bit too. And then I got a call from my dissertation advisor back at FSU who said, hey, they have an opening at Florida Realtors for an economist. And I said, okay, what's Florida Realtors? And I looked it up, and I was like, oh, okay, the Realtor Association, it has they're starting a research department. The former NAR chief economist, John DeCillo, is setting it up.
Right.
I studied housing as a PhD student in economics. I studied urban economics in particular, so I studied housing markets and how they were affected by all the things in the environment in the region. My interest in that coming from the Midwest, where, you know, especially the Rust Belt, where our cities decayed. We had, you know, everyone where I grew up in Dayton lived in the suburbs, and the city was in bad shape, and that was just what interested me in it. But as I did that, I was getting into all this housing data, and I started running models on home prices and things like that. So it was right up my alley. So I took the job. and left Disney, which I thought was kind of a gamble because I could have had a pretty nice career at Disney, and you know, it's a pretty prestigious place to work. So, but it turned out great. I took over the department from John in 2016 when he went back into retirement, and the rest is history. And then it was kind of a quiet few years until the pandemic hit.
Yeah, well, let's get into that a little bit. So, you know, obviously, you know, we kind of joked that, you know, when right before the pandemic, you know, you came out on stage and you were talking about, you know, all these things that you were kind of seeing that were going to happen in the market, and obviously things shifted like that, right? And so, I don't think anyone obviously saw the pandemic coming, and then when the pandemic hit us, you know, out of nowhere, no one saw that we were going to have this crazy second half of 2020. You know, I think everybody was kind of like in panic mode, and then it kind of obviously carried into 2021. You know, what did you see back then? I mean, did you see that was something that you were able to kind of predict once you were able to kind of understand what was happening with the pandemic, that we're going to get this pumped up demand finally released? Or, you know, what did you see back then?
Well, I fortunately was one of the only people who did see it coming, and not because I'm brilliant or anything, but because my wife is. She started seeing the videos coming out of China and said, we should really worry about this. And normally I ignore her and because I'm a terrible husband. But this is the one time I decided to listen, and I said, okay, you know what, I'll bite. Maybe this is going to be a big issue, and it's not going to be bird flu or whatever. Right. And then I started looking at it, and fortunately we started getting data eventually. You know, they started collecting data on this really early. This is what differs from, you know, past pandemics. And once you could see that and just look at how fast the cases were spreading, I actually, you know, by the end of February, I was pretty convinced it was going to end up being what it was.
Right.
So that gave me an advantage out there. Now, take that knowledge, and you're pretty sure there's a pandemic coming, but then you have no idea how the country's going to react.
Sure, of course.
So yeah, it was still difficult to forecast anything in terms of the housing market. I knew that a pandemic was coming before a lot of people, or I was convinced of it, because for once I did listen to my wife. But you know, beyond that, the two things we want to look at with the housing market are, you know, what's going to happen to home prices and what's going to happen to home sales and listings. And the correct call we did make was that home prices would not collapse due to the pandemic.
Right.
And I hope I was able to put a lot of people's minds at ease doing that. Where I whiffed in a big way was how fast we would bounce back and how fast the recovery would be in terms of the number of sales. Yeah. So we just figured a lot of people would stop listing, a lot of people would stop buying, and those would cancel each other out in terms of price.
Yeah, you know, talking about price, how did you see it? Because, I mean, you know, I remember, obviously, so the second half of the year was just crazy busy, right? We had, you know, double the amount of transactions. It was almost like the spring market typically that we go through kind of felt like it was an extended spring all the way from like the summer or even to the end of the year. You know, but home prices really didn't skyrocket a whole lot, in my opinion, at least from what I was seeing. But I felt like in 2021, all of a sudden, especially towards the second half, you know, kind of barely bleeding over to 2022, we saw, like, in fact, I remember at one point I had refinanced my house and we got the appraisal, and I'm kind of arguing with the appraiser. I'm like, all right, it's just a refinance. I'm not getting cash out. It is what it is. And then I ended up selling that house literally like not even a year later for, gosh, probably like felt like maybe 20% more than when I had the appraisal done. So why did we see obviously like this huge bump obviously with prices, and how is that now going to play out kind of going forward?
Well, I mean, it's apparent in hindsight, and not a lot of us should have paid more attention to the fact that the 30-year fixed mortgage rate was driven to an all-time low within a month of the pandemic starting.
Right.
The Fed immediately started to pull the floor out and the rug out under interest rates, allow them to fall to an all-time low. Not only did they fall to an all-time low, it was a significant margin, right? The all-time low previously had been around 3.3, 3.4%.
Right.
And that was back in 2012. That only lasted for a couple of months. Then it got there again in 2016 for a month or two. This time, it dropped past that level and then went all the way down to about, 2.7, 2.8.
Yeah.
And stayed there for several months, and then all of 2021 it was around 3.
Right.
So over almost 2 years of all-time low interest rates. Nobody who owned a home at the time, whether they if they had a mortgage, their rate was automatically going to be higher than that. So refis ruled the day in 2021.
Right.
But that also is a disincentive to move when the rate gets higher, but when the rate gets lower, it is not. So it freed up a lot of people to consider buying. The pandemic, on top of that, we're all trapped in our homes.
Yeah. Realize, hey, I need a bigger house.
Your kids are at home, you're trying to work during the summer, and maybe you want a bigger yard, you want more space, or you just need a home office that you didn't have before.
Right.
So all of those things. Or you're just really sick of it. You don't, for those of us who were working 5 days a week, we weren't at our homes that much.
Right.
Then you get, then you realize I don't really love this house like I used to. So all of those factors, and we're bored, and there's listings online. Why don't we go on and look? And,
right.
And
listen, that's what got me. I mean, we were sitting at the house thinking, during the pandemic, where I was in one side of the house working in the dining room table. My wife was in the kitchen. I could almost kind of yell at her, say, "Hey, you're talking too loud. I'm on a Zoom." We didn't have a real office because I have 5 kids, so we converted our office into a 5th bedroom for one of our kids, and we realized, what? Gosh, we need to get a bigger house. So, that's what kind of led us to go in that direction. So we were joking around before we started filming that obviously when this episode is airing on April 5th, a few days after April Fool's Day. So we were going to kind of joke around, but let's just be real and be honest, right? So here we are, in 2023, and I could tell you that January of 2022 compared to May of 2022, it was for me, I saw a complete turnaround, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that probably for the first few months going into the summer, I think a lot of the consumers that were out there and even the agents were trying to just understand, all right, what's going on? How is this going to play out for the rest of the year? Obviously, from what I saw there was kind of waves, right? Ups and downs. I think people started to realize, all right, maybe this is going to be the new norm. Rates are going through the roof. Maybe I want to wait this out. Maybe I can't wait this out. What are you seeing now in 2023? What are your kind of expectations? Here we are now in April. What do you see now for the kind of the second half of the year? Where we are today, and I'm not going to hold you to it. Don't worry. I know a lot of things can change.
Oh yeah.
But then talk to us too. What can change, right?
Right. So yeah, interest rates are still the biggest factor.
Yeah.
2021, by the way, we were talking about how really things took off with prices then. That's also when investors came back in the market.
Yeah.
Eviction moratoria ended, all of that. And that really, I think, on top of all of the normal interest, pushed prices up. So prices are elevated. They were, there was a sudden spike in demand for housing, and prices got pushed up due to all the bidding wars we had. So even though historically a 7% interest rate is not that high for the 30-year fixed, we haven't been there in a while.
Right.
And not only that, but prices went up so much. The affordability is an issue for a lot of buyers.
Sure.
There's a lot of buyers where it isn't an issue. There's folks still coming from New York and California where Florida still seems really cheap.
Right.
So we talk about all these negative things that are happening in the market. We haven't lost 100% of our sales, right? There's still sales going on. And those that do go on are at prices that are 40, 50% higher than they were at the beginning of the pandemic.
Right.
So, in terms of volume, dollar volume, we're still actually ahead of the pre-pandemic curve for now. But as sales continue to be weak, that could change. Prices have stopped rising rapidly, but they're leveling off for now. So what I'm looking at for the rest of the year is just to see the Fed eventually get to getting this rate pushed down a little bit, or at least stop hiking. But they're very data dependent, and it seems like the interest rate is just going to react to every piece of data we get that could influence the Fed's decision. The big two are the inflation rate, which we call the consumer price index, is the first inflation measure that comes out each month. So that's the one that moves the mortgage rates the most. And whenever the Fed speaks and gives a hint if they're going to change their behavior, that affects things. And then the jobs number. The jobs number that comes out where it says, this many 100,000 jobs were created in the U.S. this past month. That always gets headlines. in this case, in this market, if you're in real estate, a good jobs number is actually bad because
I know, that's crazy. Why?
Because the Fed wants to cool off the economy.
Yeah.
And that's how you kill off inflation. Inflation happens, think about the bidding wars in real estate.
Right.
Inflation happens when there's bidding wars in everything, right? People are just willing to pay more and more, and people will keep raising prices as long as people are willing to pay for it. So there's just a lot of demand out there. The demand has moved from goods to services as we get to go outside now and do stuff.
Right.
So goods inflation, where we had those supply chain issues, that's actually gotten somewhat better. That's good news. But services inflation is still rising. So the Fed is still concerned about that. So we're just watching the Fed and how they react to all these data points. We had some really positive inflation data points towards the end of last year, and you saw rates come down to around 6.
Yeah.
Now they're going back up, and they're close to 7 again because we've had a couple months where actually things turned around a little bit and look a little worse. So, interest rates, it's hard to predict any given month where you're going to be on these things.
Sure.
In the longer run, we will get lower. By next year, at some point, I would fully expect we're lower. Something really bad would have to happen if not.
Yeah.
There's also some good signs that we saw from when they did fall in December and January. We did see, home builders were reporting that their business was picking up. And in existing homes, we definitely saw some more showings and a little bit of increased foot traffic.
Right.
So people have pulled back because, these interest rates are very high. Your monthly payment is going to be a lot more now than it was 2 years ago for the same priced home. But at the same time, there's also just a lot of people who saw this sudden change and it kind of scared them onto the fence a little bit.
Yeah.
But, those people will come back once you realize that if interest rates, go down later, fine, you can refi.
Exactly.
If they go up later, then you bought at the right time now. Mm-hmm. In the longer term, I expect them to be lower. So, because the Fed is going to do that as soon as they're sure they've curbed inflation.
Well, I mean, and I guess a positive sign has been too, where so the Fed is still kind of increasing rates, but it hasn't been as drastic as it was, toward the second half of last year. So hopefully that's a sign that they are starting to kind of scale back a little bit, and at some point,
It really seems like they were getting close to saying we're done, and then we just started getting a couple months of bad data points. Here's the problem. If they don't nip it in the bud now, then it could get out of control, and they'll have to do a lot more than they're doing now later, and that's what they're scared of happening. Right. If you let inflation go for, if you ease off on it, people start demanding bigger raises, and then they get the bigger raises, they make more money, and they're able to spend more money on goods and keep driving prices up. That's the spiral that they're fearful of. So they do need to, make sure that they've nipped it in the bud. But a lot of the policy they use, it takes several months to see if it worked.
Yeah. What do you expect in regards to home prices? I mean, so I know that they've kind of leveled off. Do you think that we're going to stay level, or do you think in some markets we could potentially see a dip?
I think we're going to level off in the West Coast or out in the mountain states that brought a lot of people out of California into Idaho.
Yeah. Some
of those markets, Phoenix, are starting to cool off, and you're starting to see prices dip a little bit. But I don't expect anything catastrophic. Like you're going to find, a lot of experts online are have been trying for years, by the way, to scare us into these things. You can find their videos on YouTube. You just look for a picture of a guy panicking with a chart going down and a house on fire, and it usually says the end is nigh or something.
And then they're trying to sell you something.
Those videos have been out there for years. I used to look. I'm like, I got 3,000 hits on my video this month, and they get like 800,000.
Yeah.
So it's an information war battle that we lose a lot. But here's the thing.
Taking a sip of water here because we're about to get the real.
Yeah, I'm going to take a sip of water.
The real deal right here.
In regards to prices, you need two things for prices to fall dramatically. Like, the comparison we all make is what's seared into our minds, which is 2008, 2009.
Exactly.
In order for something like that to happen, you need demand to absolutely crater. And let's face it, demand's wounded right now because of these higher rates. But everything else that affects demand, by the way, is still in really good shape, especially in Florida, where we're still drawing a lot of people in from out of state. We've got a lot of upward pressure on our prices. The demographics are right. The senior population here is growing. The millennial population is growing. There's a lot of people who need housing. That's good. But mortgage rates have really hurt demand. But that by itself isn't going to kill off our prices and bring them way down. What we need at the same time is for a ton of houses to come on the market. Because that's how it happens, right? If you want to list, then you're home, but you think you're not going to get anywhere near what you will get in a couple of years' time when mortgage rates level out, then you might be more resistant to doing it, especially at a lower price.
Right.
So it's not like last time when everyone was foreclosing and people were using adjustable rate loans. Imagine if everyone had adjustable rate loans this cycle, right? Right now, but no one does. 99% of the loans out there are fixed.
Right.
So no one's going to, suddenly not be able to make their payments.
Right.
Even if we have a recession, no one thinks it's going to be a big enough one to put enough unemployed people out there who can't pay their mortgage anymore. The last time we had a normal recession, by the way, was in the early 2000s, the dot-com recession, and you can barely see the foreclosure rate move during that time. So there's just very few events out there I can foresee that are going to, just wash over Florida with housing supply.
Yeah.
We're still at a pretty much all-time, shortage in terms of housing in Florida. We're building more than most states, but we're also growing more than most states.
Yeah.
So it's still not keeping pace. We just need more housing units. So
it's like basically economics 101, supply and demand.
Yeah, that's how I get through it, right? It's worked. So,
yeah.
So
I've said this before, and I think I may have gotten this from somebody else. Hopefully I'm providing somewhat accurate information, and it's okay to call me out if I'm not here. So obviously we're going to kind of weather the storm this year. And when I say storm, by the way, I mean we're still seeing plenty of transactions. And we were talking about this on a few other episodes where, some of our top producers, we have a Blue Diamond Club, and we actually saw more Blue Diamond Club members get appointed for the second half of 2022 than we did the year before, right? Which is a great sign. I mean, there's still business out there, and we have to just go out there and just work a little harder now. I've been telling folks, right, we get through some of this uncertainty this year, some of the volatility in the market and everything else. I think that by the end of this year, going into even next year, it's going to kind of feel like 2019, right? Before like all the craziness of the pandemic and everything else. Is that like what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When we report our numbers every year or every month at Florida Realtors, we report them on a year-over-year basis. It's usually good to compare what's happening this year to a year ago, because then you don't have to worry about seasonality affecting the rate of change you're talking about.
Right.
So, the difference between December and January is always kind of weird because it's the end of the tax year and whatnot. So reporting the change from December to January wouldn't make much sense. Reporting January to January does. So comparing, but the problem has been what we're comparing to this year was, last year. Last year, at the beginning of the year, when rates were still low, was a fantasy world, right? It was the Fed gave us a bunch of candy, and we partied for 2 years, and I hope no one made the mistake of thinking this was going to be a permanent thing.
Right.
So in January, in February and March of this year, you're looking at those year-over-year numbers as they come out. You're going to see 30-40% drop in sales compared to, again, crazy 2022 and 2021.
Right.
If you look compared to before the pandemic, maybe 2019, we're not very far below that level right now in terms of sales. And the mortgage rate is actually a lot higher than it was in 2019. And prices, of course, are too. So, and because of that, dollar volume is still well above 2019 levels.
Right.
So you might see fewer transactions, listings, sales, but the ones you do have are going to be for 40 to 50% more than prior to the pandemic. So you just got to keep that in mind. But in the long run, once we get beyond this, rates cool off to somewhat normal levels, Florida's in really good shape. And I'll tell you, that's first of all, the work from home revolution That's driven a lot of people down here, right? Especially if you never have to be in the office, why not move to a state where there's no income tax?
Right.
And you can buy a condo near the beach and do your work on your laptop and go to
Stare
the
at
beach.
the ocean, yeah.
Right. And if you're coming from Manhattan and Brooklyn, which are two of the biggest sources of our people coming down here, you can actually afford, space to live in, right? So you get a lot more for your money down in Florida.
Yeah, $2 million up in New York gets you like a little 5x10 little box. Down here, it's a lot.
So I get interested when I see these large corporations switching around their work from home policies and trying to find something more permanent, and a lot of them have pulled people back. In most of those cases, the employee is revolted, right? So there's going to be an element of work from home in the longer run, and for a lot of people, that means they'll be able to come down to Florida, full time or part time during the year. So that's a new permanent kind, a new kind of customer we didn't have before. It's a new permanent level of demand coming into Florida. Cool.
So tell all the folks that are listening, where can they go? Because that's one of the things that I love about, obviously, Florida Realtors. It makes it so easy for our realtors to get the right information. But even for like the consumers that are out there, they just want to get an idea of what's really going on. Because I go on Facebook and someone's saying this and that. Where's a good place for folks to go to get real good information and get an idea of what's happening in the market?
Sure. Well, at Florida Realtors, we do a monthly video after we release the numbers every month.
Right.
And we release 2 or 3 weeks into the month. So, for instance, our next release will be the February data, and that will be in March 20th, sometime around then. And the reason it takes us so long is because you guys got to close your listings, or we can't tell.
Yeah.
So we have to wait a couple of weeks to make sure all the data's in the MLS, and then we produce the numbers. So once we do that, we shoot a video, and so every month I'll give you an update, much more brief than this one.
Right.
But just let you know where you're going. Most of the media, they're going to, there's going to be some hyperbole sometimes, but generally the mass media has reported on this cycle, I think, a lot more fairly than the last one.
Right.
So I don't feel like I'm getting terrible misinformation when I'm reading the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or Bloomberg or whatever. So just read a lot. If you're a member of Florida Realtors, you get a Florida Realtors news email every day. They do an awesome job at compiling that. And I check that every day. Just get in the habit of reading some of those articles, and you'll stay up on it. And it's not hard to follow what they're putting in them.
Sure.
So just stay up on top of that. As a member of Florida Realtors, if you ever want any statistics for the state of Florida or your local area, we have on our website a section where you can download PDFs by county or metro area. But we also have a new interactive stats platform called SunStats, sunstats.floridarealtors.org. And you can create your own charts in it. You can create your own infographics.
Right.
All of that's available to you, too, as a member.
Yeah, powerful tools. Listen, I always say, realtors, we are professionals, right? So we got to go out there and educate, inform, obviously, our clients, what's really going on in the market today. So, well, listen, Dr. O'Connor, I appreciate, like always, having these conversations with you. And this time, just being real and kind of talking about some of the things that, are happening right now in the market. So we appreciate you coming on. And that's going to be our show for this week. And thank you for watching here at the Joe LaRosa Show. And we will see you next time.